Baik, sekarang saya persilahkan Saudara Toby Daniel Mendel untuk menjelaskan pendapat saudara sehubungan dengan substansi permohonan yang diajukan oleh saudara pemohon. Silakan.
Thank you very much. Let me first start by outlining why I think international law is relevant to the consideration of this case. I'm sure that you have your views about that, but I would like to just say why I think it is the case. The guarantee of freedom of expression as found in the Indonesian constitution, like in most constitutions, is relatively brief. But this is a very complicated and social right. The implications of it in any particular context are quite complicated, and so it is relevant and important to look to what is the case under international law when interpreting the constitutional guarantee. That is to say, when applying the constitutional guarantee to the facts of a particular case, what international law says is relevant. Indonesia, of course, is formally bound by international law. Your job as a constitutional court is not to interpret international law, but to interpret the Constitution. But taking account of the binding nature of international law, I would suggest that it is incumbent upon you to attempt to interpret your constitution consistently with international law where that is possible. I would go beyond that and say that it is interesting to look at the practice of other states in interpreting their own constitutional guarantees of freedom of expression. While these differ in important respects from country to country, at the same time the core guarantee of freedom of expression in democracies is similar and is, if interpreted consistently with international law, can provide a good source of inspiration to you as you interpret your own constitutional guarantees.
Bisa sebentar. Untuk membantu penerjemah, mungkin ada baiknya Saudara Mendel tidak terlalu panjang dan terlalu cepat. Agak diperlambat sedikit, silakan.
Okay. Thank you. I will do that. Okay, let me move now to the importance attached to freedom of expression under international law. And I will refer to a 1946 resolution of the United Nations General Assembly, which talked about the importance, the fundamental underpinning of freedom of expression as an aspect of democracy, and also, and I think that this is very important, as the touchstone of all of the freedoms to which the United Nations is consecrated. So the General Assembly saw the right to freedom of expression as being important in its own right, as being important as an underpinning of democracy, but also as being important in the role it played in making it possible to protect and guarantee all other rights. So it is in that sense a foundational right. That reference to the importance of freedom of expression has been reaffirmed repeatedly and constantly by international courts, including global international courts and all of the regional human rights courts that exist around the world, in Africa, in Europe, in Latin America, as well as on numerous occasions, far too numerous to mention, and including by your own court, by national courts. There are a number of reasons why freedom of expression is considered to be so important a right. First of all, and I think this is almost too obvious to state, it is a fundamental underpinning of democracy. If people are not free to speak, if they are not free to criticize government, if they are not free to debate and discuss ideas, democracy simply doesn't exist. So the most important role for freedom of expression is as a fundamental underpinning of democracy. Secondly, I would point to the importance of freedom of expression in combating corruption. Freedom of expression has been widely recognized as a key tool to combating corruption. If people are free to speak about bad things that are happening in society, particularly corrupt practices, then the possibility of combating them, of alleviating those problems, is increased significantly. Thirdly, I would talk about the role of freedom of expression in promoting accountability. It is through open discussion in society that citizens can hold, we tend to think primarily of accountability in relationship to the government, can hold the government to account, but I would say that it actually goes much more deep than that. It's a much more profound phenomenon. Freedom of expression plays a role in holding all social actors, all powerful social actors to account, including, for example, large businesses, private actors, and even powerful private individuals. And then the fourth role that I would outline, the fourth important role of freedom of expression in society, is that it is believed to be the best way to discover the truth. It is through open discussion, through free competition of ideas, what has been referred to as the marketplace of ideas, that society is most likely in the end to come to the truth. If we suppress certain ideas, if we suppress certain viewpoints, then truth will be less likely to emerge. So those are four. There are many other roles that have been identified for freedom of expression, but those four are the most important, I would suggest. As important as freedom of expression is, it's recognized under international law as well as under every national constitution that it is not an absolute right. Freedom of expression may be restricted. There are a number of grounds upon which freedom of expression may be restricted. The rights and reputations of others, national security, public order are some of those. So freedom of expression, although a very, very important right, is not a right without limitation. It may be restricted. International law establishes a very clear test for restrictions on freedom of expression. A restriction must meet each part of a three-part test to be considered legitimate. If it fails any part of that test under international law, it would not be considered to be a legitimate restriction on freedom of expression. The first part of the test is that the restriction must be provided by law. It must be set out in a law. It is not for public officials of their own motion to impose restrictions on freedom of expression. It is a fundamentally important right, and only the legislature, only the law-making system that's formally recognized may restrict that right. In defamation cases, that is rarely a problem. Those restrictions, as in the circumstances of this case, are set out in law, and so that part of the test is met. The second part of the test is that the restriction must serve a legitimate aim. International law lists the legitimate aims that would justify a restriction on freedom of expression. As a fundamental right, it is not any social goal that might justify a restriction, only important social goals. One of those social goals, which is specifically recognized under international law, is the rights and reputations of others. And in most cases, that serves, defamation laws serve to protect the reputations of others, and so they pass that part of the test. I would note, however, that in certain cases, for example, where defamation laws protect the reputation of public bodies, that national courts, the issue hasn't come before an international court, but national courts have held that they don't pass this part of the test because national courts have held that public bodies don't actually have a reputation in the proper sense of that word, and so that there is no legitimate aim served by defamation laws protecting public bodies. I'll come back to that issue later in my presentation. The third part of the test, and this is the part of the test that in international decisions almost always is the main focus in defamation cases, the third part of the test is that restrictions on freedom of expression must be necessary to protect the legitimate aim. It's not enough simply to relate to a legitimate aim, they must be necessary to protect that aim. There are a number of implications of that international courts have elaborated of the term necessary, which is found in international law, specifically in international treaties. The first is that provisions restricting freedom of expression must be carefully designed to focus on protection of the legitimate aim. They cannot be randomly designed. It's legitimate to restrict freedom of expression in certain circumstances, but due care and attention must be given when designing measures to restrict freedom of expression, taking into account its fundamental nature as a human right. Secondly, restrictions must not be overbroad. The restriction must attach only to the harmful speech which it's sought to limit and not limit other speech. And thirdly, and perhaps most importantly, as an aspect of necessity, is that the restriction should not be disproportionate. And in assessing the proportionality, courts should assess the harm to freedom of expression from the restriction compared to the benefits in terms of protecting the legitimate aim. And a key aspect of that is that sanctions should not be excessive. If speech is harmful, it is legitimate to restrict it, but not to restrict it massively to protect only a minor interest. And the reason for this is that unduly broad restrictions will have a chilling effect on freedom of expression, what's referred to as a chilling effect. They will not only affect the speaker who's being sanctioned, but all of society observing that sanction being applied will be more cautious in their use of their right to freedom of expression out of a fear of attracting that sanction themselves. National courts have described this phenomenon as a risk that individuals will steer well clear of the prohibited zone, not only not engaging in prohibited speech, but also not engaging in a penumbra of legitimate speech around the prohibited zone because they don't want to take any risk of attracting that sanction. And I would like to quote to you a quotation from James Madison, U.S. Supreme Court Justice, who I think captured this phenomenon very poetically. And he said, "Some degree of abuse is inseparable from the proper use of everything, and in no instance is this more true than in that of the press. It has accordingly been decided by the practice of the states that it is better to leave a few of its noxious branches to their luxuriant growth than, by pruning them away, to injure the vigor of those yielding the proper fruits." In other words, as Mr. Madison has so well put it, if we are too assiduous about limiting all speech that may cause harm, if we do that too harshly or too rigorously, then other citizens, other people will be intimidated and will fail to use their proper right to freedom of expression. They will be fearful of saying things that they're allowed to say because they see that pruning activity and thereby sort of clip their tongue, as it were, and don't speak even though they would be allowed to. Let me now pass to the particular issue in the case before us, which is penal sanctions for defamation. And I will talk briefly about the origins of criminal defamation law, because I think it's important to understand where in most countries these laws have come from, if we're to understand whether they are still legitimate, whether penal sanctions are still legitimate today. And the origins of criminal defamation are in public order. Criminal defamation was first developed at a time when it was likely that insults thrown to other people would result in perhaps very serious public order situations where noblemen would insult each other and actually fight small civil wars or have ongoing battles between them. Later on, I'm going back now to sort of the 13th, 14th century, the very early origins of criminal defamation. Later on, defamatory statements, slander could give rise to duels where people would duel each other and one person might die. And so the importance of restricting slanderous statements made about other people was rooted at that time in public order considerations, not in protection of reputation as such, but in public order considerations. I would submit that in the modern world, although a barroom brawl, although fights may occur because of slanderous statements, essentially that interest no longer exists. And furthermore, we now have in every society, including in Indonesia, a panoply of other laws which sufficiently protect public order. So the public order justification for penal sanctions for defamation, I would submit to you, is no longer relevant in the modern world. Under international law, on the principles of international law, first of all, I will suggest that there are two reasons why penal sanctions, why imprisonment for defamation is not legitimate. Firstly, I suggest it is a disproportionate sanction for the offense of a slanderous statement, for the offense of defamation. I mentioned before that under international law, part of the necessity test was that sanctions not be disproportionate. Imprisonment for defamation, I will suggest, is excessive. Secondly, it's, as I mentioned as well, under the test of necessity, it's incumbent upon states to carefully design the measures so that they affect freedom of expression as little as possible while still protecting the legitimate interest. And I would suggest to you that the experience of the many, many countries in the world who rely only on civil defamation to protect reputations and are successful in that endeavor shows that criminal defamation laws, and particularly imprisonment for defamation, is not necessary to protect reputations. In other words, reputations can be adequately protected in society, and I will come back to this, but it's certainly by no means only sort of highly developed Western societies where this is the case. There are many, many developing countries where penal sanctions for defamation are no longer applied, and yet reputation is adequately protected. So I would say that on this analysis, penal sanctions are not necessary to protect reputations and therefore cannot be justified as a restriction on freedom of expression. I mentioned before that there are many countries which rely exclusively on civil sanctions. There is a clear global trend in this direction. In the last 10 years, probably 12 countries around the world have done away either entirely with criminal defamation or done away with imprisonment for defamation. Within Asia, Sri Lanka has entirely abolished criminal defamation laws, and yet they still have adequate tools to protect the reputations of those who have been defamed. As you may know, Cambodia a couple of years ago did away with imprisonment for defamation, and again, I don't think that the country has seen a rise in the problem of defamation. Other sanctions are addressing it. And there are developments currently underway in the Philippines to depenalize defamation as well, and in many, many other countries around the world, in many countries in Africa, in Latin America, as well as in Europe. Let me now move briefly to a consideration of the international jurisprudence, that is to say the treatment in the different international and regional systems for the protection of human rights and how these have dealt with this issue. No case directly on this point, no contentious case directly on this point has come before the UN Human Rights Committee, which is the body which administers the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. However, that body, the Human Rights Committee, a body of international experts, has expressed concern about the application of penal sanctions in defamation cases numerous times in the context of country reports. Countries are required to report every 5 years to the UN Human Rights Committee on their progress in implementing the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and in that context, the committee has on numerous occasions expressed concern about criminal defamation laws and penal sanctions. The UN Commission on Human Rights, a body which existed until a couple of years ago, passed every year a resolution on freedom of expression, and in that resolution it expressed concern year after year after year about the application of imprisonment and penal sanctions in the context of defamation. So at the international level, we have two of the top bodies expressing serious concern about the use of imprisonment in defamation cases. In the Inter-American System for Human Rights, the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights produced some years ago a report on desacato laws. Desacato laws are the particular form of criminal defamation law in the Americas. And in that report, the Inter-American Commission called for the complete abolition of desacato laws, which it considered to be offensive to the right to freedom of expression, on the arguments that I presented earlier, namely that the imprisonment is a disproportionate sanction and that civil defamation laws are adequate to protect reputations. In no case before the Inter-American Court of Human Rights has a criminal defamation sanction been upheld. The Inter-American Court has not gone quite so far as to say that imprisonment is clearly a breach of the right to freedom of expression, imprisonment for defamation, but it has expressed very, very serious concerns about imprisonment for defamation. In La Nation case decided a few years ago in 2004, the president of that court basically went so far as to say that imprisonment for defamation could never be legitimate. The court was able to decide the case without going quite to that point itself, and so it took a slightly more cautious route, but the clear direction of that court is towards non-recognition of imprisonment as a sanction for defamation. The African Commission on Human Rights has a much smaller caseload, and the cases before it tend to be much more extreme in their breach of human rights. Sort of the kind of situation such as is going on now in Zimbabwe comes before that body, and so they have not probed into the I would say somewhat subtle issue of criminal sanctions for defamation. The European Court of Human Rights has decided literally hundreds of cases on defamation. In no case so far has it upheld a imprisonment for defamation. So out of the hundreds of cases, in every case in which imprisonment was applied, it found a breach of the right to freedom of expression. It has called on states generally to display restraint when applying criminal sanctions for freedom of expression generally, as well as in defamation cases, recognizing that criminal sanctions are the most extreme form of sanction available to regulate an activity, and recognizing that other measures, for example, civil measures, are normally more appropriate when restricting freedom of expression. Although, of course, there would be some circumstances, for example, national security, where a criminal sanction for breach of freedom of expression might be legitimate. It has, when assessing criminal defamation cases, it has referred to the possibility of using penal sanctions to protect public order. As I mentioned before, I see no connection anymore between defamation and public order, but it has never referred to the legitimacy of penal sanctions as a means of protecting reputation. So if while no international court has specifically declared that imprisonment for defamation is a breach of the right to freedom of expression, at the same time, no international court has ever upheld imprisonment for defamation, and all of the international courts have made statements which are extremely hostile to that idea. Let me turn finally to the question which I believe is also before you, of the use of defamation law to protect the reputations of public bodies. Am I correct that that's an issue under consideration? Yeah. International courts have not had the opportunity to consider this matter. No case on that has come before international courts, but numerous national courts have considered this issue, and in a growing number of countries like the United Kingdom, like India, like South Africa, actually also Zimbabwe itself, courts have held that public bodies do not have a right to sue for defamation. Public bodies. Of course, private corporations, private individuals have that right, but public bodies, because of their public nature, don't have that right. And these courts have presented 4 arguments why those bodies should not have that right. First of all, democracy requires absolute openness of debate about public bodies. It is essential that people should feel, that citizens should feel free to criticize without restraint the activities of public bodies. That is a fundamental underpinning of democracy. Secondly, these courts have held that public bodies do not have any reputation as such. They are public bodies, they represent the public as a whole, and they have no individual reputation of their own. As public bodies, they are comprised of the whole society, and to talk of them having a reputation is not a proper use of that term reputation, unlike, of course, a private corporation or a private individual. Thirdly, public bodies have other means to defend themselves. Public bodies have access to the media. They have the ability to make statements refuting any attacks upon them, any attacks that might be considered defamatory. So they have other ways of addressing the problem than by going to court. And then finally, these courts have held that it is an abuse of the use of public funds to allow public bodies to sue. The public, whose money these bodies are using, would much rather see that money go to the public interest job that these bodies are supposed to be doing than seeing their money being used to defend these public bodies. So it's been held by these courts that it's an abuse of public funds to allow public bodies to defend themselves, because they will, of course, have to use funds to do that. So let me now just pick up on a few of the key points that I'd like to reiterate, and then I will close my presentation. International law recognizes the fundamental importance of freedom of expression, and particularly the importance of freedom of expression as an underpinning of democracy. However, it permits carefully designed restrictions on freedom of expression, but most importantly, any restriction must be necessary to protect the legitimate aim. So in this case, must be necessary to protect reputations to be considered legitimate under international law, and necessity implies proportionality, importantly. Criminal defamation laws, and particularly penal sanctions for defamation, it is submitted, are not necessary, firstly because they're disproportionate, that is to say they are excessive compared to the wrong done, and secondly because less intrusive measures, namely civil defamation laws, are adequate to protect reputations. This is a phenomenon that has been recognized very clearly in a growing number of national jurisdictions, and as a matter of principle has been recognized by international courts and authoritative international bodies. And finally, a growing number of national courts have recognized that it is not appropriate to allow public bodies to sue in defamation because this undermines democracy and because these bodies do not at root have any reputation. Thank you very much.
Baik, saudara pemohon, apa masih ada yang perlu ditanyakan kepada ahli? Kalau tidak ada lagi, anggota majelis ada yang mau tanya. Saudara dulu, silakan.
Terima kasih Yang Mulia, kami akan menanyakan satu hal. Pak Tobi, secara umum saya bisa ambil kesimpulan bahwa yang penting dijamin tidak hanya kebebasan berpendapat, tetapi juga kebebasan setelah menyatakan pendapat. Saya tertarik dengan chilling effect atau yang telah Anda kemukakan. Bisakah Anda jelaskan bagaimana pidana penjara ini akan menyebabkan banyak warga negara atau masyarakat, kelompok masyarakat lain yang kemudian tidak akan berani untuk menyatakan pendapatnya terhadap masalah-masalah yang menyangkut kepentingan umum. Dan bagaimana hukum internasional mengatur hal tersebut?
Silakan dijawab.
Thank you. Yes, that is correct. International guarantees of freedom of expression understand freedom of expression as a broad social phenomenon to be protected. For example, international law protects the right not only to impart information and ideas, that is to say, not only to speak, but also to seek and receive information and ideas. So from the perspective of international law, the right of society to be able to have access to a free flow of information and ideas is as important and intimately connected, of course, to the right of speakers to speak. So it's not only the speaker that's being protected under international law, but the listener. In other words, in its role as an underpinning of democracy, freedom of expression requires that citizens will have access to a variety of different viewpoints. And for that, of course, we need to protect the right of speakers to speak. The problem with excessive sanctions under international law, and there have been very clear cases which have held that excessive sanctions of their own are a breach of the right to freedom of expression. The problem with excessive sanctions is, firstly, that the speaker will be saddled with an excessive sanction, in other words, overly punished for what he or she has done wrong. But more importantly, the problem with excessive sanctions, and particularly imprisonment, which is the most excessive sanction that can be applied, the problem with that is that all of society will observe the application of this sanction. Seeing it being applied in that way, they will be far more hesitant to exercise their own right to freedom of expression, even though they may be exercising that right perfectly legitimately. Nobody would like to risk going to prison for saying something, and so, and this has been an observed phenomenon in countries around the world. As a result, individuals will, decline to make even protected statements out of fear that they might attract this sanction, even though they wouldn't attract it, but they fear that they might. And that is at root the chilling effect. And this is a phenomenon which has been observed when a harsh penal sanction is applied. You see a quietening of the criticism in newspapers. You see the content of newspapers and of the public expressions becoming more bland because people simply don't want to take that risk. Thank you.
Cukup?
Terima kasih yang mulia.
Baik.
Ya.
Satu lagi.
Terima kasih Pak Tobi. Saya bertanya, di dalam KUHP atau Kitab Undang-Undang Hukum Pidana Indonesia, salah satu pasalnya antara lain 310 ayat 2 menyatakan, atau mungkin 310 ayat 1 dulu, berbunyi barang siapa sengaja menyerang kehormatan atau nama baik seseorang dengan menuduhkan sesuatu hal yang maksudnya terang supaya hal itu diketahui umum, diancam karena pencemaran dengan pidana penjara paling lama 9 bulan atau pidana denda paling banyak Rp4.500. Pasal 310 ayat 2. Jika hal itu dilakukan dengan tulisan atau gambaran yang disiarkan, dipertunjukkan atau ditempelkan di muka umum, maka diancam karena pencemaran tertulis dengan pidana penjara paling lama 1 tahun 4 bulan atau pidana denda paling banyak Rp4.500. Pertanyaan saya kepada Pak Tobi, apakah pasal ini sesuai atau menghormati hak-hak kebebasan berekspresi? Yang kedua, apakah menurut saudara pasal ini juga masih pantas untuk diberlakukan dalam negara demokrasi seperti Indonesia? Terima kasih.
Silakan.
Okay, My view is that criminal sanctions for defamation altogether are unnecessary in a democratic society and should be abolished. But I think international law is pretty clear on the issue that imprisonment for defamation is not a legitimate restriction, that the problem of defamation, we all recognize that defamation can be a problem in society, but the problem of defamation can be dealt with in less extreme ways than imprisonment, basically through financial measures, through the civil law particularly, and so I would say that the possibility of imprisonment for defamation, simply for saying things, whether they are presented orally or in written or broadcast form, is not a legitimate restriction on freedom of expression, and so I would say that those provisions are not legitimate to the extent that they provide for imprisonment.
Cukup. Soal pantas tidak pantas untuk di Indonesia biar kita yang menilai. Biar ahli dari luar negeri bicara umum saja. Silakan, ada lagi pertanyaan? Cukup? Masih sebagai ahli, sesama ahli tidak usah saling tanya. Pihak terkait, tapi sesudah ini saya persilakan nanti kalau pemerintah mau mengajukan pertanyaan juga, silakan disiapkan. Sekarang saya persilakan pihak terkait dulu, Pak Batubara.
Terima kasih Bapak Ketua Mahkamah Konstitusi. Mr. Toby Mendel, saya Leo Batubara. Anda sudah tahu bahwa KUHP yang kami masih gunakan adalah buatan kolonial Belanda dan diwariskan kepada pemerintah kami, berisi 37 pasal yang dapat mengirim wartawan masuk ke penjara karena pekerjaan jurnalistik. Kemudian aktivis demokrasi dan aktivis kemerdekaan pers berjuang agar dilakukan reformasi dari criminal defamation menjadi civil defamation. Hasil perjuangan itu antara lain telah terbit Undang-Undang Pers nomor 40 tahun 99 yang isinya tidak lagi mengkriminalkan pers dalam pekerjaan jurnalistik. Tetapi kini pemerintah sedang merancang revisi KUHP. Isinya bukan lagi 37 pasal. Sudah 61 pasal yang bisa mengirim wartawan dan pers ke penjara karena pekerjaan jurnalistik. Malah hukumannya sudah ditambahi menjadi lebih lama. Kemudian sekarang ini Indonesia sedang melakukan perang terhadap korupsi yang merajalela. Pertanyaan kami, apakah kecenderungan revisi KUHP yang semakin fasis itu akan membantu rakyat Indonesia menuju pemerintahan clean and good governance? Terima kasih.
Silakan dijawab secara umum saja.
Let me first address the issue of terrorism, and I believe the issue before the court is one of defamation. As I tried to make clear in my presentation, I see no longer in the modern democracy a link between protection of reputation and protection of public order. Obviously, the issue of terrorism is a very, very serious one, and states need to employ effective measures to address it, but this does not require criminalization or certainly imprisonment as a means to protect reputation. I believe that the democratic trend in countries around the world is to recognize what I submit is already established under international law, and that is that imprisonment as a sanction for defamation is not legitimate. I think that an important reason for that is that free speech is a fundamental underpinning of democracy, and defamation laws have historically been abused, particularly to undermine democracy and to prevent legitimate criticism, and that this is the problem that we need to face, or we need to tackle in democracies. We need to preserve open criticism, particularly of government, but not only of government, of any social actor who is exercising power, and that anything which seeks to limit, or which will have the impact of limiting free criticism, not any criticism, because malicious lies should not be told, but anything which generally limits legitimate criticism, and I think criminal defamation laws, in particular imprisonment for defamation, do limit legitimate criticism, then that is not a positive democratic trend.
Baik, sekarang saya persilakan, barangkali dari pemerintah ada yang mau tanya? Ada? Tidak ada? Baik, kalau tidak ada, sekarang saya undang barangkali 2 atau 3, 2 saja barangkali, 3 lah ya, dari anggota majelis. Tapi tolong dicatat dulu, nanti dijawab sekaligus. Dimulai dari Pak Hakim Natapaya, silakan.
Saudara Mendel, tadi saudara sudah memberikan beberapa komparatif mengenai tindak pidana yang ada kaitannya dengan pencemaran ataupun dengan insult. Dan seolah-olah dan saudara mengatakan memang ada pembatasan. Dan mengenai masalah ancaman pidana, menurut saudara itu sudah banyak ditinggalkan dan memberikan contoh di Eropa. Tapi saya akan memberikan contoh. Pasal 185 daripada Kitab Undang-Undang Hukum Pidana Jerman yang mengatur mengenai insult. Di situ masih mengatakan mengenai pidana. Saya bacakan dengan lengkap. Insult shall be punished with imprisonment for not more than 1 year or a fine, and if the insult is committed by means of violence, with imprisonment for not more than 2 years of a fine. Artinya di sini adanya aturan mengenai ancaman pidana di Jerman, baik mengenai criminal responsibility maupun juga dengan fine, dengan denda. Dan begitu juga masalah malicious gossip juga diatur di Jerman. Kedua, praktek di Swedia. Di Swedia pun mengatakan ada pembatasan. Dengan secara eksplisit dikatakan ada 15 batasan terhadap masalah-masalah yang kaitannya dengan pencemaran itu ataupun ketertiban umum. 1 adalah berita dengan menimbulkan high treason, pengkhianatan terhadap negara. Kedua, instigating war. Ketiga, espionage. Keempat, unauthorized traffic in secret information. Dan ini adalah hal-hal yang dilarang. Ketiga, ada persoalan. Di dalam praktek Amerika, amandemen keempat dari Amerika mengenai freedom of expression, bahwa di situ ada pembatasan. Hakim John Marshall mengatakan demikian, bahwa yang diatur oleh amandemen itu adalah the freedom of speech, bukan protect all speech. Jadi yang dilindunginya adalah kemerdekaan untuk berbicara, bukan adalah kebebasan untuk berbicara semau-maunya. Di dalam putusan Amerika juga, Hakim Holmes, ada batasan bahwa sesuatu berita itu apabila menimbulkan create a clear and present danger, maka itu adalah sesuatu hal yang bisa dipidana. Nah, bagaimana pendapat Anda praktek-praktek di negara yang demikian bebasnya masih ada pembatasan dan juga masih ada beberapa negara, walaupun di Amerika sudah ada dikenal ada civil responsibility, tetapi masih juga dianut criminal liability. Udah ada lagi. Tadi saudara mengatakan di dalam kerangka hukum internasional. Di dalam human rights, Universal Declaration of Human Rights yang diatur di dalam pasal mengenai pasal 19. Itu diakui mengenai everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. Tetapi pasal 29 ada pembatasan daripada Universal Declaration of Human Rights itu yang mengatakan demikian. In the exercise of his rights and freedom, everyone shall be subject only to such limitation as are determined by law, solely for the purpose of securing due recognition and respect for the rights and freedoms of others. Jadi ada respect for the rights and freedom of others and of meeting the just requirements of morality, public order, and general welfare in the democratic society. Tunggu, Pak, ada satu. Nah, di dalam hal ini, di dalam pasal 19 daripada Covenant Political Rights yang mengakui mengenai masalah tersebut, dikatakan demikian. 1. Everyone shall have the right to hold opinions without interference. Betul. 2. Everyone shall have the right to freedom of expression. This right shall include freedom to seek, receive, and impart information, etc. Tapi ayat 3-nya mengatakan demikian. The exercise of the right provided for in paragraph 2 of this article carries with special duties and responsibilities. It may therefore be subject to certain restrictions, but this shall only be such as provided by law and are necessary. Bagaimana tanggapan Anda mengenai ini, baik di dalam praktek Amerika, Swedia, maupun di dalam hukum internasional?
Cukup, karena panjang, saya persilakan dijawab dulu. Silakan. Ini kami belum punya pendapat, ini baru cara bertanya ya. Silakan.
You want me to respond now? Yes. Okay. Let me pick up on a few themes. Firstly, of course, you are absolutely right that international law, as well as every national constitution, recognizes the possibility of freedom of expression being restricted. I mentioned in my presentation that it is not an absolute right. It is not absolute under international law or in any country, including Sweden, Germany, and the United States. You mentioned Article 29 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, as well as Article 19.3 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and those are the key provisions I was referring to when I talked about the three-part test for restrictions. So it may be legitimate to restrict freedom of expression, but only if that restriction meets the three-part test that I mentioned. The provision restricting freedom of expression is set out in law. It pursues a legitimate aim, such as the legitimate aims that you read out. And then finally, it is necessary in a democratic society to protect those aims. And that necessity part of the test is a particularly important one from the perspective of defamation law. So it's certainly correct that every society restricts expression. We would have, I think, a lot of problems in society if we didn't recognize restrictions. At the same time, it's also recognized that if restrictions are excessively broad, if restrictions are excessively harsh, freedom of expression cannot play its role in underpinning democracy, in promoting accountability, in ensuring the discovery of the truth. So we limit those restrictions. International law recognizes the legitimacy of some restrictions, but not any restriction. When it comes to the particular restrictions, I think we can distinguish between, for purposes of this case, between restrictions which seek to protect public order, national security, those kinds of things, and those restrictions which are designed particularly to protect reputation. You mentioned, for example, in the context of Sweden, restrictions for treason, for incitement to war, for espionage, and for divulging secret information. For the most part, those restrictions are aimed at protecting national security, and to some extent, a lesser extent, public order. Those are not restrictions designed to protect reputation. In the United States, you mentioned the clear and present danger test. That test is also associated with national security and public order. So it's been said that you can't cry out fire in a crowded theater because you might create a rampage and people will be hurt if there is no fire. Of course, if there's a fire, then it's a different matter. So these kinds of abuses of the right to freedom of expression are not permitted anywhere. And they are certainly not permitted under international law. I think the more difficult question is when it comes to defamation, and again, every country in the world recognizes the legitimacy of some restriction on freedom of expression to protect reputation. Citizens, individuals cannot be allowed to go about telling malicious lies about other people. That's simply not acceptable. It's not acceptable in Sweden or in Germany or United States or Indonesia or in the United Kingdom or anywhere. And that's rules which prohibit those kinds of statements will always be recognized as legitimate. The question, though, is how to sanction such statements, whether the sanctions should be monetary in nature or should be penal in nature, and there I think you are seeing a very clear, trend away from penal sanctions in democracies. In the United States, quite some time ago, the possibility of imprisonment for defamation was ruled out by the Supreme Court. I mentioned some other countries in Asia. Let me mention a few more countries. In Mexico, for example, again, there is no possibility of imprisonment for defamation. In Costa Rica, the same situation. In Ghana, in Ukraine, in Georgia. So a growing number of countries have done away with that possibility. You mentioned, and it is absolutely correct, however, that even in established democracies like Germany, and it's not only Germany, even in the United Kingdom, even in Sweden, in France, there remains technically on the books the possibility, not in France, let me caveat that, there remains technically on the books in many European countries the possibility of imprisonment for defamation. But in those countries, those laws have not been applied for many, many, many years. So while there's only a few countries which have taken the proactive step of abolishing those laws, and France is one. France, a few years ago, did away with the possibility of imprisonment for defamation. But in countries like Germany, in Sweden, in Britain, in the Netherlands, in all of these European countries, in fact, imprisonment is not applied as a sanction for defamation, even though the formal step of removing it from the books has not been taken. I think if there were a case where someone were imprisoned for defamation in any of those countries, it would certainly lead to a constitutional case such as before you right now, and quite possibly a case before almost certainly a case before the European Court of Human Rights, and in that case the European Court of Human Rights would have to deal with the issue. It's significant that the European Court of Human Rights has not had to deal front on with that issue because no cases come before it, because of the lack of application of those laws in those countries where though they still exist.
Baik. Mungkin nanti untuk dicatat pemohon barangkali untuk tambahan ya, data-data kuantitatif perbandingan berbagai negara itu bisa diminta nanti bisa dilengkapi nanti. Silakan, barangkali ada satu lagi dari sebelah kanan dan satu nanti sebelah kiri. Dicatat dulu ya, satu saja. Kelana siapa? Ya, Pak Hakim Palguna, silakan.
Terima kasih Pak Ketua. Saudara ahli, kalau kita menyebut hukum internasional, selalu itu artinya kita merujuk kepada the Statute of International Court of Justice sebagai sumber hukum internasional, khususnya pasal 37 ayat 1. Yang saudara sebutkan tadi sebagai the global trend dari penghapusan sanksi pidana terhadap hal-hal yang berkaitan dengan penghinaan, pencemaran nama baik, atau fitnah, itu masih sebatas resolusi dari PBB yang secara teoritis hukum internasional masih kita golongkan sebagai soft law, ataukah itu sudah merupakan bagian dari sumber hukum internasional yang diakui, the formal source of international law yang kita kenal selama ini. Nah, itu pertama. Dan kemudian yang kedua, kalaulah itu merupakan the latest development atau perkembangan terakhir dari hukum internasional yang masih berupa doktrin, yang kemudian tampak dipraktikkan di dalam praktik peradilan negara-negara di dunia, dan kemudian atas dasar itu saudara ahli membuat kesimpulan bahwa itu sebagai perkembangan terakhir. Pertanyaan saya adalah, adakah di antara putusan-putusan itu yang secara spesifik merujuk kepada kebebasan pers, ataukah freedom of expression secara umum yang dikeluarkan dari pengaturan hukum pidana? Terima kasih.
Baik.
International human rights law pertains between individuals and states. So it essentially protects individuals from certain actions by their state or the state in which they find themselves, as opposed to sort of general international law, which historically has dealt with relations between states. The International Court of Justice is a forum for resolving disputes between states and not between individuals and states. And as a result, it has not, for the most part, had to consider the question of human rights. Sometimes human rights issues do come up because they emerge in relations between states, but not very often. So it has not ruled on, as far as I know, on any freedom of expression issue. Certainly it doesn't have a developed body of jurisprudence on that. So to answer the question of whether this is soft law or hard law, the UN Human Rights Committee, the body which applies the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, is not an international court, and its decisions are not formally binding, so technically they are soft law and not hard law. However, most states which have voluntarily agreed to submit themselves to the jurisdiction of this body also respect its decisions. The individuals who sit on it are universally recognized as the leading experts on these issues from around the world. There are 18 of them from countries all over the world, and their decisions are by most states considered to be authoritative, even though not technically binding. Although it's technically soft law, I think it's extremely persuasive, at least, for judges such as yourselves deciding freedom of expression issues. I'm not sure I entirely understood the last part of the first judge's questions, but certainly there are lots and lots of cases before national courts where criminal provisions have been struck down as offensive to freedom of expression. I would say that in almost every country, almost every democratic country, including of course your own, that is the case. And there are a number of countries where penal sanctions for defamation have been held by national courts to be unconstitutional, if that was the question. Yeah, to answer the second question, I should mention that my organization works around the world. I myself have worked in many, many different countries around the world. I have, in the course of my work with Article 19, been to Indonesia itself probably 15 times, just a guess. So I'm reasonably familiar with the differences between countries and also somewhat familiar with Indonesia itself. It is, of course, correct, and I absolutely agree that different cultures have different values and around many, many different things, and importantly around the issue of reputation. I myself am from Canada, and in my country, our views and our values around reputation are different than in other countries. And international law, I would say, respects that and recognizes that in terms of the definition of what is considered to be defamatory. So certain kinds of statements which in my country would not be considered to harm my reputation, but if they were made in Indonesia would be considered to harm reputation, and that's a difference between our countries, and international law is sensitive to that difference. I don't think, however, that those cultural differences are so important when it comes to the nature of the sanction which should be applied for defamation. And I've seen it argued or heard it argued many times, in our country we need to imprison these people. It's the only way to stop that kind of statement. And I don't believe that to be true as a matter of fact. And I mentioned to you a number of different countries from all different regions of the world where criminal defamation, where imprisonment at least for defamation has been done away with, either formally in law or in practice. This is by no means a Western phenomenon. It is a growing phenomenon in Asia, even in the ASEAN region, and I think that you can see in those countries that the other types of sanctions for defamation are sufficient to regulate the problem. Where somebody intentionally and maliciously attacks reputation, and the reference was made to that kind of situation, where that is the case, then the matter must be considered to be very serious, as opposed, for example, to an instance where somebody makes a mistake and alleges a false fact. That's one type of defamation. Where somebody intentionally engages in defamatory statements, that is a very serious matter, and in such cases, the level of monetary sanction can reflect that seriousness, and ultimately, I think a monetary sanction can deal with any form of abuse, no matter how egregious, when it comes to protection of reputations. That is to say, if the fine is large enough, it will deter the action without the need for imprisonment.
Baik, cukup ya? Tidak ada lagi yang mau tanya ya? Saya kira dengan demikian, khusus untuk keterangan ahli Saudara Toby Mendel, saya anggap sudah cukup, dan atas nama mahkamah ini, saya ucapkan terima kasih pada saudara. Keterangan saudara akan kami pakai sebagai bahan pertimbangan. Tentu saudara tidak menilai konstitusi Indonesia, tetapi dari keahlian saudara mengenai hukum internasional, tentu sangat banyak yang dapat kami pakai untuk memahami konstitusi Indonesia sendiri. Karena bagaimanapun konstitusi Indonesia dan konstitusi semua negara modern sudah mengadopsikan berbagai elemen, unsur-unsur dari hukum-hukum internasional yang bersifat universal. Oleh karena itu, meskipun berlakunya nasional, tapi ide-ide, prinsip-prinsip yang berlaku universal juga banyak sekali tercermin di dalam konstitusi-konstitusi negara modern, termasuk Indonesia sendiri. Jadi oleh karena itu, meskipun keahlian saudara hukum internasional, tapi sangat penting bagi kami menilai, memeriksa perkara ini. Sekali lagi saya ucapkan terima kasih. Kalau saudara ada closing statement, silakan.
No, thank you for permitting me to appear before you.
Baik, terima kasih.